I think one of the biggest risks facing women today might not be failure. I think it might be success. Success attached to goals we never consciously chose. I've been thinking about that a lot lately because women today are incredibly capable. We're building businesses, leading teams, raising children, supporting families, holding together lives that require an extraordinary amount of effort. And yet the more women I speak with, the more I keep hearing some version of the same question. Sometimes it's spoken out loud, sometimes it isn't. Why do I feel disconnected? Why am I exhausted? Why do I feel like I'm constantly moving but rarely arriving anywhere that feels meaningful? The more I sit with those questions, the less I think they're about capability, and the more I think they might be about direction. What if we become incredibly good at building lives we never consciously chose? What if we spent so much time learning how to move that we've forgotten how to ask where all of that movement is actually leading? Today, I want to talk about that. I'm Raquel. Welcome to the Actioned Woman. If you're here, I'm willing to bet you're carrying a lot. Maybe you're building a career. Maybe you're raising children. Maybe you're building a business. Maybe you're trying to hold together pieces of a life that matter deeply to you while wondering where the years are going. Whatever brought you here, I'm glad you're here because this podcast exists for women who want to live more consciously, women who want to understand what is shaping their lives, women who want to move from reaction to authorship, women who want to build intentionally. And lately, I found myself unable to shake a particular thought. Why are so many incredibly capable women feeling increasingly disconnected from their own lives? I hear versions of it all the time. Sometimes it sounds like frustration. Sometimes it sounds like exhaustion. Sometimes it sounds like a woman saying, I should be happy, and yet something feels off. I think many women have experienced a moment like this. You're driving somewhere, you're answering emails, folding laundry. Perhaps you are sitting in a meeting, looking at a calendar that is completely full, and a thought quietly appears. I know how to keep all of this going. I don't know if it's taking me where I want to go. That thought fascinates me because it doesn't necessarily mean anything is wrong. It doesn't mean your life is bad. It doesn't mean you are failing. I think it means you're beginning to ask a deeper question. A question I don't think we spend enough time talking about. What is leading the life I'm building? Because something is. Something is always leading. And the more I think about it, the more I wonder if women today are facing a problem that often hides inside success. From the outside, everything can look fine. The career can look successful. The family can look successful. The schedule can look successful. The life can look exactly as it was supposed to look. Yet somewhere underneath all of it, there is still a feeling that something isn't connecting. One of the things I've been noticing lately is how much attention we give to movement. We're fascinated by progress, the next goal, the next milestone, the next level. And there is nothing wrong with that. What I rarely hear people talking about is a different question. What is all of that movement actually serving? The more I sit with it, the more I think the issue might be direction. Women are taught a lot about how to move through life, how to adapt, how to navigate challenges, how to carry responsibility, how to keep going when things become difficult. Those are very valuable skills. I've relied on many of them myself. What I don't hear talked about nearly as often is what is leading all of that effort, because there is a difference between movement and direction. There is a difference between carrying a life and consciously creating one. And I think that distinction may explain far more than we realize. The more I think about it, the more I keep coming back to an uncomfortable possibility. What if many women are becoming incredibly successful at goals they never consciously chose? What if we become so focused on movement that we rarely stop long enough to examine direction? Because if that's true, it changes the entire conversation. And it leads us to a distinction that I think may be one of the most important distinctions a woman can make: the difference between capability and clarity. One of the reasons I cannot stop thinking about this is because I think we've accidentally confused two very different things: capability and clarity. Most of us spend years developing capability. We're taught how to solve problems, how to navigate challenges, how to become effective, how to handle responsibility, how to keep moving when life becomes difficult. And women become incredibly good at it. Honestly, sometimes I think women are astonishing. Look around for a moment. Most women I know are carrying an extraordinary amount. They're building careers, they are raising their children, supporting their family, managing entire households, leading businesses, and showing up for people they love. And somehow they keep finding a way forward. I think that's remarkable. For a long time, I couldn't make sense of something. How could so many capable women feel disconnected from their own lives? Those two things didn't seem like they should belong together at all. When I thought about capable women, I thought about women who were solving problems, building things, navigating challenges, handling responsibilities, women people trusted, women people relied on. And yet I kept meeting women who had all of those qualities and were still asking themselves questions they couldn't quite answer. Questions like, why doesn't this feel the way I thought it would? Why do I feel disconnected? Why does it feel like I'm constantly moving but rarely ever arriving? The more I sat with those questions, the more I realized I had been treating capability and clarity as though they were the same thing. They're not. A woman can know exactly how to get things done and still feel uncertain about where all of that effort is leading. She can become incredibly effective without ever stopping long enough to examine what all of that effectiveness is serving. And maybe that's a distinction I've been trying to understand. Capability helps us move. Clarity helps us direct the movement. Those are two very different things. The modern world spends a tremendous amount of time helping women become capable, and there is value in that. Capability matters. Being able to solve problems matters. Being able to navigate the life matters. Being able to take care of the people we love matters. What I don't see discussed nearly as often is clarity. The kind of clarity that helps a woman understand what she values, what matters to her, what she wants her life to stand for, what she is consciously trying to create. The more I sat with that distinction, the more I found myself asking a different question. What is actually leading all of this? The ambition, the effort, the decisions, the direction of the life itself. Because something always is. And once that question appeared, I could not ignore it, because another one showed up right beside it. A question that felt far more uncomfortable. Did I actually choose the goals I'm pursuing? Or have I simply been following a path I never stopped to examine? A question that kept following me was surprisingly simple. Did I choose this? And I don't mean the project sitting on my desk. I don't mean the thing on my calendar next week. I don't mean the goal I'm currently chasing. I mean the life. Did I consciously choose the life I am building? Or did I slowly inherit pieces of it without realizing? The more I sat with that question, the more uncomfortable it became, because I started realizing how many things I had never really examined. The older I get, the more fascinated I become by the stories we inherit. Ideas about success, ideas about ambition, ideas about what a meaningful life is supposed to look like. Most of us receive those stories long before we're old enough to question them. Then we spend years building towards them, working towards them, organizing our lives around them without ever stopping to ask where they came from. I find myself wondering how often that happens, how often a woman spends years moving towards a destination she never consciously chose because the map simply felt normal. And I think that's what makes inherited maps so powerful. They don't feel inherited, they feel obvious, they feel true. Eventually, they become so familiar, we stop noticing they're there at all. We stop examining them, we stop questioning them, we simply start living them. And that realization, it stayed with me. Because one of the things I notice about modern life is how much attention is given to movement. Keep growing, keep advancing, keep building, keep going. And there is something admirable about that. Movement can create extraordinary things. The question I couldn't stop thinking about was whether movement automatically creates alignment. I don't think those are the same thing. A woman can spend years moving towards something and still find herself wondering why she feels disconnected when she finally arrives. That's the part we don't talk about enough. The moment when everything makes sense on paper, the career makes sense, the responsibilities, they make sense, the decisions make sense, the life makes sense. Yet something inside keeps whispering a question. Is this still mine? I love that question because it forces a woman to stop staring at the destination and start examining the map. And I don't think women have been given themselves permission to examine the map. Life moves quickly. People need things, responsibilities pile up, children grow, businesses grow. The next season arrives before the last one feels finished. Before long, years have passed, and sometimes the map remains completely unquestioned. Then one day, a different question appears, a question that has the ability to unravel an entire story. If nobody was watching, would I still want this? Would I still choose this direction? Would I still choose this version of success? Would I still choose this life? I've always loved that question because it removes the audience. And once that audience disappears, something else becomes easier to hear. Your own voice. The voice that extends and existed before expectations, before performance, before proving, before comparison. The voice that knows what matters. I think many women haven't lost that voice. I believe they've simply spent years listening to everything else. And maybe that's why so many capable women wake up one day feeling strangely disconnected. Everything is functioning, everything is working, everything can be explained, yet something feels out of reach. Almost as though they've been following a map they never stopped to examine. I began to understand this conversation was never really about goals. it was about authorship. It was about whether a woman is consciously participating in the direction of her life or simply inheriting it as she goes. And once I saw that, I couldn't stop noticing something else. I started seeing women everywhere who had become incredibly valuable. The woman everyone relies on, the woman who always figures it out, the woman people call when something matters. And the more I paid attention, the more I found myself wondering something I could not shake. What happens when a woman becomes so valuable to everyone around her that she slowly loses connection to herself? Because I think that happens far more than we realize. As I kept thinking about authorship, I found myself coming back to women. Women I've worked with, women I've coached, women I've stood beside through divorces, career changes, health scares, new babies, grief, ambition, reinvention. And there was something I could not stop noticing. The women who were caring the most were often the women struggling the most to hear themselves. That observation stayed with me because on the surface, it doesn't make sense. You think the strongest women would feel the most connected to themselves, the most certain, the most grounded, yet I kept seeing something different. I kept meeting women who knew exactly what everyone around them needed. They knew what their children needed, what their partner needed, what their boss needed, what their clients needed, what their families needed. Yet when the conversation turned towards them, something quite interesting happened. The certainty disappeared. Someone would ask, "What do you want?" And the room would suddenly get quiet. I've seen that moment more times than I can count, and every time it happens, I find myself thinking about the same thing. How did we get so good at hearing everyone else's voice while becoming strangers to our own? I don't think that happened overnight. I believe that happened very slowly. So slowly, most women never notice it. At first, a woman becomes dependable. People trust her. The more people trust her, responsibilities find their way to her. Opportunities find their way to her. People begin relying on her. And because she's capable, she carries it. Then she carries a little more, then a little more, then a little more. Years pass. And eventually she becomes known for being the woman who can handle anything. Everyone admires that woman. I've admired that woman. I've been that woman. The problem is that carrying can become so familiar that it starts feeling like identity. A woman no longer sees herself as someone who carries responsibility. She starts seeing herself as the responsibility carrier. And that distinction matters here. Because once usefulness becomes identity, something begins happening in the background. Her relationship with herself starts becoming conditional. She feels valuable when she's helping, valuable when she's solving, valuable when she's producing, valuable when she is needed. And without realizing it, she starts measuring her worth through contribution. I think that's one of the most subtle traps women fall into. Contribution is beautiful. Service is beautiful. Supporting people is beautiful. The trap is not contribution. The trap is forgetting that your value existed before the contribution. That thought, it changed something for me because I started wondering how many women are exhausted from carrying a life they feel responsible for maintaining, but disconnected from. That's a very different kind of exhaustion. Sleep does not solve it. A vacation does not solve it. A day off doesn't solve it because the exhaustion isn't always physical. Sometimes it's the exhaustion of living too far away from yourself. I think that's why so many women feel emotional when they're asked a simple question. What do you want? It's such a simple question, yet for many women, it feels strangely difficult to answer. And it's not because they don't have dreams. It's not because they don't have desires. Because they've spent years listening outward, years paying attention to everyone else's needs, years becoming fluent in everyone else's expectations. And eventually, the voice underneath all of that becomes harder to hear. It's not gone. It never is. It just becomes quieter. That realization hit me particularly hard when I became a mother, because motherhood asks extraordinary things of women. It asks us to give, to nurture, to care, to pay attention constantly. And there is something profoundly beautiful about that. Yet one of the messages I quietly wrestled with was the idea that my own becoming should somehow wait, that there would be another season for it, a calmer season, a quieter season, a season where fewer people needed me. The older I get, the more I wonder if that season ever arrives. Life isn't waiting. The children aren't waiting. The years aren't waiting. Everything is unfolding right now. And if a woman spends enough years postponing herself, eventually postponement starts looking a lot like abandonment. That thought has stayed with me because I don't think women were meant to disappear inside the lives they love. I think they were meant to remain present in them, to help shape them, to help author them, to help create them. And the more I thought about that, the more another question started emerging. If so many women are experiencing some version of this, then maybe the question isn't what's wrong with women. Maybe the better question is, what kind of culture keeps producing this experience? As I sat with all of this, another question kept following me. If so many women are experiencing some version of this, where is it coming from? I don't think thousands of women wake up one morning and independently decide to disconnect from themselves. Something larger is happening. The more I paid attention, the more I started noticing a pattern. It felt like almost every conversation was pointing in the same direction. Forward, bigger, more. The details changed. The direction rarely did. I find myself wondering when that became the default setting for so many of us. And to be clear, I don't have a problem with growth. I believe in growth. I believe in ambition. I believe in building extraordinary things. What stayed with me was a different question. When did we stop asking where all of this was going? There's an old expression that says, a fish is the last creature to discover water. And I've been thinking a lot about that lately. I wonder if many women are having a similar experience. We spend so much time living inside a culture that rewards movement that we stop seeing movement as an influence. It simply starts feeling normal. The pace feels normal. The pressure feels normal. The constant pursuit of the next thing feels normal. Eventually, we stop asking whether we're choosing those things or simply swimming inside them. I think that's what makes this conversation difficult. The things shaping us are often the things we can no longer see. One of the conversations I hear often today is about visibility. Women being seen, women advocating for themselves, women creating opportunities. I understand why that conversation exists. For a very long time, many women were taught to shrink themselves. Visibility can be powerful. Visibility absolutely creates opportunities. What I found myself wondering was something slightly different. What is all of that visibility helping a woman build? Because visibility is a tool. It isn't a direction. The same is true of success. The same is true of influence. The same is true of growth. These things become incredibly powerful when they're attached to something meaningful. Without that, they can take us almost anywhere. I started thinking about women who had achieved things they once dreamed about. The promotion arrived, the business grew, the opportunity came. And yet some of those women still found themselves asking a question they never expected to ask. Now what? The question fascinates me. I don't think the achievement failed them. I think they eventually discovered that achievement was never meant to answer every question. At some point, a woman still has to decide what all of those things are serving. What kind of life are they helping create? What kind of woman is she becoming through the pursuit of them? I think that is one of the most overlooked conversations in modern life. We spend a tremendous amount of time learning how to get somewhere, very little time deciding where we're trying to go. And after a while, movement starts becoming its own reward. The next opportunity appears, the next responsibility appears, the next challenge appears. Years pass, the calendar fills, life keeps moving. Eventually, a woman can become incredibly skilled at managing motion. She can become exceptional at responding. Then one day she looks up and she realizes she has spent years maintaining movement. She isn't entirely sure she has been directing it. That realization has hit me hard because I don't think the greatest risk facing women today is failure. I think it is also drift. I think it's spending years moving without ever stopping long enough to ask where the movement is leading. And I do not say that as criticism. I think many women are doing exactly what the world has rewarded them for doing. They've learned how to carry more, how to solve problems, how to keep things moving. Those are valuable skills. The challenge is that the skills required to keep life functioning are not always the same skills required to consciously direct it. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, I found myself returning to a question that started changing everything. What am I building? At first, that question felt powerful enough on its own. And then I realized something. Building alone does not guarantee authorship. A woman can build from pressure. She can build from fear. She can build from comparison. She can build inside a life she never stopped to examine. So the question had to deepen in a more honest way. What is this building serving? What is it shaping in me? Those two questions changed the weight of the first one. Suddenly, build was no longer just action. It became alignment. It became evidence. It became a way of checking whether my life was moving with me or simply moving around me. That is where purpose entered the conversation differently. And when purpose entered the conversation, I noticed something interesting. The moment purpose comes up, I can almost hear what some women are thinking. That sounds wonderful. I have no idea what mine is. Honestly, I understand that. For a long time, I thought purpose was something you discovered. Like there was a single answer waiting somewhere, a single calling, a single thing you were supposed to figure out before life could begin making sense. The older I get, the less I believe that's how it works. I don't think purpose arrives all at once. I think purpose reveals itself through participation, through paying attention, through noticing what keeps calling you back, the work that energizes you, the ideas that stay with you, the conversations you can't stop having, the things that make you feel more like yourself. That matters because if purpose feels like a destination, many women never begin. It feels too far away, too big, too important to get wrong. And while they're waiting to discover it, years passed. I've started thinking about purpose very differently. I don't think purpose is asking women to solve their entire lives. I think purpose is asking women to pay attention, to notice, to stay awake, to become curious about what strengthens their connection to themselves and what weakens it. That's where I start. And eventually I realized I had been asking purpose to do a job it was never meant to do. I was asking it to provide certainty. I was asking it to reveal the entire map. I was asking it to tell me exactly where I would end up. Purpose was never meant to do any of those things. Purpose isn't a destination. Purpose is orientation. There is a huge difference. When a sailor looks for a lighthouse, they aren't looking for a destination. They're looking for direction. The lighthouse doesn't tell them everything. It doesn't tell them how rough the water will be. It doesn't tell them what tomorrow will bring. It doesn't tell them how long the journey will take. It simply helps them stay oriented. It helps them remember where they are in relation to where they want to go. That changed everything for me because suddenly I didn't need my entire life figured out. I didn't need certainty. I didn't need all the answers. I needed enough light to know whether I was moving towards myself or away from myself. That felt different, and that certainly felt possible. And once I stopped trying to solve my entire life, another question appeared. What am I building this week? Not next year, not 10 years from now, this week. Because life is lived in weeks. Confidence is built in weeks. Relationships are built in weeks. Strength is built in weeks. Businesses are built in weeks. A life is built in weeks. And that is where the build was born. The build is not another goal. It is not another item or checklist. It is not another demand competing for your attention. The build is something you consciously choose to create, something meaningful enough to deserve your energy, something that moves your life from reaction into authorship. Every week I chose one build. Sometimes it is a project. Sometimes it is a conversation I've been avoiding. Sometimes it is a creative pursuit. Sometimes it is a commitment to my health. The build itself changes. The practice remains the same. The more I practice this with myself and my clients, the more I notice something. Building isn't optional. We're building something regardless. And that realization kept hitting me harder than I expected. Our relationship is being built. Trust is being built. Confidence is being built. Distance is being built. Connection is being built. Even the relationship a woman has with herself is being built. The question was never whether we are building something. The question was whether we are participating in it consciously. And those are two very different lives. One happens by default, the other happens by design. That is why the build matters. It is teaching a woman something much larger than productivity. It is teaching her participation. It is reminding her that she still has influence over the direction of her life. It is reminding her that she is not simply managing a life, she is helping create one. Then over time, I noticed something else. The build was changing more than my schedule. It was changing me. And that is where I think many women miss something very important. We often evaluate our lives by what we produce. Very little attention is given to what our choices are producing within us. Every build leaves a mark. Every commitment shapes something. Every repeated action teaches us who we are, which means there is another question worth asking. Not just, what am I building? But what is this building serving? And perhaps even more importantly, what is this building shaping in me? Because a build can strengthen courage. A build can strengthen confidence. A build can strengthen discipline. A build can strengthen self-trust. A build can reconnect a woman to parts of herself she thought she had lost. That is why purpose, build, and becoming belong together. Purpose keeps the build oriented. The build creates movement. Becoming is what emerges through the process. And when those three things begin working together, something remarkable happens. A woman stops waiting for her life to feel meaningful. She starts participating in the creation of it, week by week, choice by choice, build by build. As I think about everything we've talked about today, I keep coming back to one thought. A life can be full and still feel disconnected. A woman can be capable and still feel lost. A woman can be successful and still find herself wondering whether she's building something that is truly hers. That is the question I've been trying to understand for a long time. Not why women struggle. Women have always carried extraordinary things. What I've been trying to understand is why so many women feel disconnected while carrying them. And the more I sit with that question, the more I think it comes back to conscious building. Because whether we realize it or not, something is always shaping our lives. Something is directing our attention. Something is influencing our decisions. Something is teaching us what matters. That question has never been whether our lives are being shaped. The question is whether we are participating in that process consciously. I think many women inherited systems, expectations, roles, and ways of measuring life that never encouraged them to consciously participate in their own direction, to trust it, to stay with it long enough to see where it could lead. They learned how to carry. They learned how to respond. They learned how to adapt, how to become valuable inside lives that needed them. Those are valuable skills. But conscious building requires something very different. It asks a woman to pause long enough to notice what is directing her life, to choose what she is building, to understand what that build is serving, and to stay with it long enough for it to shape her back. Because that is the part I know we miss. Every build changes us. Every commitment changes us. Every repeated choice leaves a mark. We are not only building our lives are building us. And that may be one of the most important things a woman ever notices, because the conversation was never only about what we're creating. It's also about who we're becoming while we create it. That's the real invitation here. Not to leave this episode with your entire future figured out. Not to suddenly know your purpose. Not to have every answer. Just to begin participating more consciously in the direction of your life. To ask different questions. What am I building? What is this build serving? Who is this build helping me become? Because a life is being built either way. Something is taking shape either way. The years are moving either way. The question is whether you are participating in the building, whether you are choosing, whether you are directing, whether you are returning to those choices often enough for your life to begin feeling like your own. And that, to me, is where authorship begins. Not in certainty, not in perfection, not in having every answer, in participation, in direction, in conscious building, week by week, choice by choice, build by build. Thank you for spending this time with me. This is The Action Woman, and I'll see you in the next episode.